Good to see you again. As you'll know by now, I'm Chris Davis, and this is Just Political Reality, your weekly dose of unbridled truth in a sea of lies. Let's get the begging bowl stuff out of the way nice and early. If you enjoy the show, subscribe to the channel, share the video, and click like, please. Don't worry, I'll remind you again at the end. We'll kick off today's show with a review of the latest economic data, before heading to interviews with Gill Sewell in Scotland and Liz Grant in Northern Ireland to look at the impact of the local election results in both countries. We end this week with an interview with Richard Lucas, the leader of the Scottish Family Party, to examine, or should that be excoriate, the SNP's record on education in Scotland. Let's get into it. Economic metrics may appear to be as dry as a bone. Unfortunately, they're also a handy mechanism for taking the temperature of the economy. Let's start with the United States, where inflation is now at 8.3%, slightly down on the previous month of 8.5%, but still near a 40-year high. More worryingly, gross domestic product shrank by 1.4% in quarter one. In other words, the economy is shrinking. Now, generally speaking, when America sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold. And there may be some early signs that that is beginning to come to the United Kingdom. Wage inflation is now running at 4% excluding bonuses, or 5.4% including bonuses here. Consumer price index inflation is up from 7% to 9%, and remember that excludes all housing related costs. The retail price index, which includes those costs, is now up from 9% to 11.1%. In my opinion, it's a fairer reflection of where inflation is, but still short of the overall figure. The producer price index is not widely quoted, certainly not in the media, as they tend to not understand it. But the input cost side of the producer price index is running at 18.6%. Now, what that reflects is the input cost being the cost to the manufacturer of buying the materials they need to make for the products that they then manufacture and sell. And as they have to include a margin, that margin has to go on top of the increased cost. That'll give you some idea of the direction that inflation is heading in. In my opinion, if you take the consumer price index figure at 9% and double it, you broadly get the producer price index figure at the moment. But I would say that's around where inflation is, 18%. It's around 1.5% per month. And you only have to look at food and diesel and energy costs to see that that's not a million miles off the pace. If anything, it's probably a little bit light. In short, we are all getting much poorer. And the government, they're standing and watching the world go by. House prices. The house price index, according to the Office for National Statistics, actually fell slightly to grow by 9.8% in the 12 months to March. In the 12 months to February, it was 11.3%. So there's just the first signs that the housing bubble might be beginning to cool. To give you an idea, average house prices increased over the year by 9.9% in England, so broadly in line with the index, 11.7% in Wales, 8% in Scotland, and 10.4% in Northern Ireland. In terms of mortgages, according to Reuters, 1.5 million people will come off 2-year fixed rates in 2022, and a further 1.5 million people will come off fixed rates in 2023. Now, this is significant as interest rates are beginning to rise, and the availability of fixed rates and the cost of arranging them is increasing, along with the interest rate. Unlike the United States, gross domestic product here in the UK is not contracting quite as quickly. Growth was flat in February and fell by 0.1% in March, but the overall quarter saw an increase in gross domestic product. Whether or not that will continue is another matter. I'm predicting that there will indeed, whether it's a technical recession or a real recession. And a technical recession means that you have 2 quarters of negative growth. That means that the economy shrinks in 2 quarters successively. We are heading for recessionary times. Stagflation is haunting the economy, and it is baked in now until 2024. A quick reminder that stagflation is essentially inflation minus economic growth. If that doesn't give you a positive number, that means your economy is contracting in real terms. We've touched on interest rates. They're currently sitting at 1%. They began the year at 0.1%. That's an increase of 900%. It doesn't sound like much to go from 0.1% to 1%. However, for those people on variable rate mortgages, believe you me, it is another stealth cost that they really cannot afford, because they don't get their mortgages at 0.1%. They get it at a rate of 0.1% plus whatever the bank or building society choose to charge. So the point about the fixed rates, with 3 million people on 2-year fixed rates coming off them over the next 12 to 18 months, that's a lot of people trying to shop around in a market that is not exactly awash with capacity, trying to find new fixed rates. Inevitably, they're going to cost more, and that cost has to be borne by the consumer. Little surprise then that consumer confidence is crashing. The one bright spot is unemployment, which is now down to 1.257 million, 1,257,000 people. That's 3.7% of the labour force, down from 3.8% the month before. For the first time ever, there are actually more vacancies in the economy than there are people unemployed, 1,295,000. Now, there is going to be a lag here, and I do expect unemployment to start rising in Q4. But it surely is time now that the government committed the resources necessary to train those who are unemployed to do the jobs that have the vacancies. Now that to me seems incredibly simple and quite logical. Will it happen? I doubt it very much, but it should. Because the alternative to fill those vacancies is more immigration, which I don't believe anyone in their heart of hearts really wants. Without sounding too Little England, English jobs for English people, British jobs for British people, I do fundamentally believe that immigration is there to bring people into the country who have skill sets that no one, or pretty much no one, in the indigenous population has, to fill the vacancies that are needed. Instead of that, what we've done since time immemorial now is bring in more and more people from overseas, pay them less money than people we could be paying in the UK who are living here already to do the same job. That has to stop. People deserve to be paid appropriately, whatever their nationality, and certainly you should not be differentiated against because you are white and British, or black and British, or just British. So it's time to do the right thing. It's time to level up in every sense. It's time to bring in people only when there is no one left in the country that can do the jobs that need to be done. That's how an economy prospers. I'm delighted to welcome to the show Liz Grant. Liz is the Chief Financial Officer for a company based in Bangor in Northern Ireland. Liz traditionally would vote for one of the unionist parties in local and national elections. And Liz joins me now to discuss the outputs really from the recent Northern Ireland elections. Liz, good morning to you.
Good morning, Chris.
Hello. Liz, there's been obviously a lot of talk about Sinn Féin now being the largest party in Stormont, despite the fact that, unless I've got the maths wrong, the Unionists actually outnumber Sinn Féin quite comfortably, but the Unionist vote was split. Do you think there needs to be a degree of more coalescent working among the Unionist community?
I think that's definitely will have to happen if they want to I suppose, stop any loyalist sort of uprising. The uprising is probably the wrong word. I don't mean that in the sense of the IRA, but I think a lot was made of Sinn Féin being the largest party. The fact is Sinn Féin got no more seats than they did at the last elections. What happened was the alliance won a lot of the vote, and a lot of the nationalist vote actually away from the SDLP. And the unionist vote is splintered. You have the TUV, who got 65,000 votes, which was 8% of the vote, but actually only got one seat, which says a lot actually. And they had and shouldn't be forgotten, because they actually represent a lot of people who would be very, very hard line, would be very much anti-protocol, would be very pro-union. And they, to a certain extent, seem to have been forgotten. And certainly in the area I live in North Down and in Strangford, they actually thought they would get 2 seats in that area because of that. And if it had gone on first preference votes, they would have.
Yeah.
So you have that, the Ulster Unionist Party, who I probably traditionally would have voted for. I really like their leader, Doug Beattie. I think he's trying to be everything to everyone, and what he needs to be to the unionist population who ultimately will vote for him. And I think because he's gone so middle of the road, a lot of people then have voted for the alliance because there didn't seem to be a great deal between the two of them. So particularly younger people have gone down that route. So unless there's some sort of unionist pact where they all sort of come into the fold and have a united message, I think that they have to go down that route if they want to have stability. I think firstly in Stormont, and if they want to promote their unionist sort of views and values in Northern Ireland.
It's interesting what you said about the TUV. I mean, we had Nigel Farage in 2015 winning as UKIP at the time, 4 million votes and getting 1 seat in Westminster. So it's not quite on that scale, but nevertheless, for the TUV to get 8% of the poll and only get 1 vote under your system, that does seem a little bit of a rum-do to me. But it strikes me that I've seen obviously the rhetoric around the protocol. You've had Boris over there this week, and it's funny, he only ever seems to remember Northern Ireland when there's a problem, usually to go and stand in front of the DUP and lie to them. I can say that because it's true. He said there wouldn't be a border down the Irish Sea, and guess what? There's a border down the Irish Sea. But in terms of the protocol itself, you'd have heard Liz Truss's comments, and obviously the DUP are quite clear that until such time as that passes through the parliamentary process and is enacted as law, Jeffrey Donaldson is saying we won't be participating at Stormont. What did you think of what she said, and what do you think of the DUP position?
I think I suppose to a certain extent I would agree with her views and what she said. I would like the protocol sorted out, like a lot of business people in Northern Ireland. I think there is this view that all the protocols acceptable to many people and many of the public because the alliance, the SDLP and Sinn Féin are pro-protocol. That's not the case. They may have the most seats, but when you're actually on the ground, when you're actually dealing with the protocol, it's a different matter completely. I mean, the company I work for, we our export worldwide, but we import a lot of our goods from the UK. It's silly things like you have to bring something in from the UK, or you sell something into the UK and there's no tariff, and because there's a complaint, it has to be returned to you. The fact that it originally came from, I don't know, Denmark or Lithuania or whoever, you then have to pay duty on it. It's absolutely crazy. And you have to then also do, for every shipment that comes in, whether it's going to be, and particularly from our point of view, it's used in the manufacturing process. It's never going to be sold on in its normal form to. You have to do paperwork through the TSS. The cost has gone up, the administration has gone up, and those are the things that normal sort of people on the street don't see, but does actually have a big impact in business. As far as DUP is concerned, I'm not surprised at the tack they've taken. At the end of the day, when they stood for election, that's what they said they were going to do. They said they would not go into Stormont and not sit unless sorted out. So I don't know why it's a big surprise to anybody that that's the position they've taken. And I think particularly with the TUV and some of there's a guy called Jamie Bryson who would have been very much anti-protocol and would have been on the rostrum with them at all the rallies. You know, I don't think they can go back now and go into government. The only thing they have said is that they will do it in small steps as they see the progress. Then, you know, they may sort of nominate a speaker, but they'll not actually go into government until it is sorted out. So I'm not surprised that they've taken that step at all.
I don't know if you've seen, there was an article recently in The Spectator by Fraser Nelson, and I think it was just a slip of the pen, but he referred to the Republic of Ireland increase in exports to fill the reduction in imports from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. And, you know, just looking at that, it's that kind of language that I think potentially needs to be challenged, because Northern Ireland, along with Great Britain, is Great Britain and Northern Ireland. It's a sovereign territory of the United Kingdom. You're not importing from Great Britain, you are selling inside the UK internal market. And it strikes me that at a time when Northern Ireland is having to take laws that it has no share or vote in from the European Union, that effectively the country has been annexed. And what that leads me to be concerned about is, particularly given the rise of Sinn Féin in the Republic, I think although there is clearly no majority at this stage for a border poll, I'm quite clear that Sinn Féin are opportunistic. And my belief is that if they win the Dáil Éireann in 2024, which I suspect they will certainly be the largest party. I think their vote share would have to collapse between now and then for them not to beat Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. I think they will call for a border poll. Now, this may sound controversial, but I'd like you to give me your thoughts. My view is that tactically, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland should say, you know what, okay, you can have a border poll, because you know they're not going to win. What do you think of that?
You know, it's funny. Firstly, what you said, Fraser Nelson had mentioned about importing, and I would say it feels like that.
Yes.
Because of all the paperwork and everything that needs to go.
Which is wrong.
And as far as Sinn Féin is concerned, yes, there are opportunities. I know that they said that wasn't on the agenda when they went out to the public. The fact that they actually won no more seats, I think, says a lot as well. But yeah, but Mary Lou McDonald, I mean, the first thing she said was, you know, we'll have to look at a border poll. That's hardly surprising to anybody. I actually, as a unionist, I don't actually fear a border poll. No. Because I don't think they will win. I think when it comes down to, you know, and I have a lot of Catholic friends, and when it comes down to, and we've had discussions about it, and when it comes down to the reality that, you know, the cost of living in the Republic is so much higher, yes, that to see a doctor, you know, all of it, and as bad as our NHS is, all of those things combined, in theory, and the romanticism in around a united Ireland is great, but when it comes down to the hard reality, I don't think that, you know, it won't happen at this minute in time. So as far as if they did call a border poll, you know, I wouldn't have a great fear in that, I don't think.
No, it's interesting because Nicola Sturgeon was one of the first to call Mary Lou and hail, you know, a historic victory of, you had 27 seats and now you've got 27 seats, but guess what? The DUP have lost a couple, so hey, you're the winners. And to me, I find all this sort of opportunistic nationalism to be quite odious. But I did see Peter Hitchens' article, and if you saw that this week on the English getting in ahead of the game and going for yeah, which I have to say, I mean, I like Peter Hitchens, one, because he's a clever guy, but every now and again you can just see him almost smirking out of the corner of his mouth. And by the way, I don't believe in English secession. I am British, I am English, I believe in the union, and that's why when I have a little titter to myself at the prospect of our Prime Minister generally going to Northern Ireland when there's a crisis, because I'm pretty sure the last time he went over there was before the 2019 election, when he was trying to sort out a deal with Leo. I think that's the last time he was actually in Northern Ireland. So you only really see him when there's a problem. I don't like that. I think he should be over more.
Yeah, and I think that's the one unfortunate thing about Northern Ireland, is that we don't actually have representation in real representation in the House of Parliament. I mean, I would love to be able to vote for a Conservative rather than a local party, and we just don't have that. We do have that here, but nobody will vote for our local Conservatives because we know they've got no chance of getting in.
Well,
So
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I would like to vote for a Conservative as well. Unfortunately, we don't have one anymore. We have a party that calls itself the Conservative and Unionist Party, but it's neither Conservative nor Unionist, Jill. They seem to be a centre-left party. So I don't know what to vote for anymore.
yeah, no, that's true. That's true. That I think everybody's tried to sort of go so middle of the road and forgotten that most people aren't middle of the road. That they have, you're either very, very woke and very left, or you're I don't think there's a lot of really, really right people, but you either veer one way or the other, and you either want a nanny state or you want people to stand on their own 2 feet, and I think now we're trying to go down the middle. And the problem you have, if you can't identify with one side or the other, then why bother voting for any of them? Or you could vote for whoever you want. They're all the same, essentially.
Actually, it's very interesting something you said earlier on, which I've often challenged in my head. And that is, the old sort of chestnut of Northern Ireland, that if you are Catholic, you must be a nationalist. And if you're Protestant, that you must be a unionist. Not necessarily so.
No.
Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I think in Northern Ireland you have the sort of ingrained sort of ideology where are we loyalist and are we a Catholic? But I think we have a very educated population who are very much middle of the road, and they would look at the situation completely and not necessarily vote one way or the other. And I think that shows why Alliance has been so big, has so much, because they don't identify with either side.
No, that's where, in my simple head, because I am a simple soul after all, I looked at the Alliance and the votes that they picked up and the seats that they picked up, and it seemed to me that largely they were chipping away at actually the SDLP votes. So it struck me that, if the Alliance are, if you like, neutral in the whole religion and nationalist, loyalist kind of divide, for want of a better term, sectarian divide, I suppose it would be called in the old days, then that's kind of where the centrists go. I mean, that if you examine the Alliance's policies, I suspect they're probably slightly left-leaning, probably slightly towards the woke side of the identity.
Certainly, they would be your Liberal Democrats without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah, and it's interesting looking at that, because again, the Liberal Democrats and the Liberal or Democratic, they wanted harder and harder lockdowns, and they wanted to keep people locked in their houses, a bit like the Chinese Communist Party. But these folks get underneath the radar because there's a perception that they are a middle of the road party. But in all seriousness, I think this whole thing, the whole sort of hullabaloo around Sinn Féin winning in Northern Ireland, I think their vote share has increased by, I think, less than 1%. And looking at the whole unionist vote, it hasn't really changed. It sort of strikes me that if you look at the proportion of people that voted, which I think was 62.9%, give or take, and broadly half voted for, or 40% say voted unionist, and about 40% voted nationalist, and then everyone else voted for the other parties, including the Alliance. And that's why, to my mind, tactically, I sort of think, well, let's get this out of the way for a generation. Now, Nicola Sturgeon will say a generation is about 4 years, but let's get this out of the way for a generation. I'd be inclined, if they do win the Dáil in 2024, the Shins, to give them the border poll. They'll lose it by about 65-35, and then that's settled then for 20 years. That's how I see it. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I you've mentioned 20 years. I something in my head thought I'd read there was the opportunity to do it every 7 years, but
there is.
So there is that, and I suppose that's maybe why they wouldn't go down that route. Yes, I do think they wouldn't win a border poll. I think the reality of the situation is, and with all due respect, when I say the UK, England, or the rest of the UK would probably quite like Northern Ireland to go away because we cost you so much, and that's a reality.
I don't feel like that.
Well, I think a lot of people, I've been listening to radio, and I have to say, I sort of think to myself, and a real lot of, I'm sort of saying, oh, well, we should give it back to Ireland, we should do this and that. I know, I mean, from a purely financial point of view, Northern Ireland costs, with the UK government a huge amount of money.
So does Scotland.
And that's because, as to Scotland, and I think that's because we have a huge public service in Northern Ireland. And this is why I think a border poll wouldn't be successful. There is no way that public service could continue, that public sector could continue under a United Ireland. And I think if you did a poll or a religious split in our public sector, it would probably be very much geared towards a Catholic sort of majority being in the civil service and being in the sector. They are the people ultimately, if there's a border poll and a United Ireland, who would be hit. That's why I think people in the light of day will be very, very, will take all of those things into account.
And how concerned are you at the prospect of a re-emergence of the Troubles? I mean, if the DUP hold their line and there's some degree of delay at Westminster in passing this legislation, or the EU say, we're going to take you to court, you're breaching international treaties. You're breaching the Treaty of Union. So it's an act of union here that needs to be reinstated as far as I'm concerned. But do you think look, I'll be candid. I have spent time in Northern Ireland. I do know my way around there rather better than probably most English people. And as I've said, I'm British. I am English, but I'm British, and I'm proud of the Union. I'm proud of everything it stands for, and I have no issue discussing its past, including colonialism and slavery and everything else, because mostly, not all, but mostly, our history is good history, despite what the revisionists want to tell us. But do you think that there is scope there for a re-emergence of the Troubles? I know there's still some sectarian skirmishing from time to time, but in reality, things are pretty peaceful now, aren't they?
Things are pretty peaceful. I think that will always hang over us, and I think certainly Leo Varadkar, he put out that little sort of stick, didn't he? Well, if you don't, if the protocol isn't put into effect and isn't put into effect in entirety, the IRA, you could have IRA trouble. You could equally have loyalist trouble because I think they feel so strongly about the link to the rest of the United Kingdom that equally could have on that side too. Do I think that'll happen? No, I don't. I mean, or I'd like to think not. Troubles and Catholic Protestant really isn't important to children anymore.
No.
I've got a 12-year-old son, and over half term, I was off and I took him on the open top bus tour around Belfast. He had no clue. I had to point out, Shankill, and this is the Falls, and and we're driving past the Maze prison, and I gave him a bit of a history lesson. He had no, he has no issue, doesn't know anything about the Troubles whatsoever. And I think there's a lot of people, and I think when you see that the increase in the Alliance vote, a lot of people are that way inclined. So I don't think, I can't see that we will go back to the Troubles as they were.
No, I agree with you. I think it made me collate some internet clicks and sells a few newspapers, but that's about all. I think it's so lazy, the journalism around that, to assume that, we're all going to go back to the mid-1990s, when most, let's be honest, the key protagonists are now either dead or virtually dead. There was the leadership of those groups. And I think it actually is insulting to the people of Northern Ireland, who I think, as you say, generationally, we're almost to, if arguably three, if you take a generation as 10 years, 3 generations on from that now. And okay, yes, there are still people, that have it in their blood, and it's passed down to them from parents and grandparents and everything else, a bit like their football team, this is your identity, you are a nationalist or you are a loyalist and what have you. So yes, you're going to have that. It's a bit like, are there extreme hard left and hard right people in every country? Of course there are, but that doesn't mean that they're going to go and kick off. So I'm relieved to hear that on the ground, your view is broadly concurs with mine.
Yeah, no, certainly. Just my daughter, we would drive. So I live in a loyalist area. Bangor would be a loyalist sort of majority population.
Yeah.
And we were driving past, and 12th of July, the flags go up in certain areas. And she said to me, "Is that for the Queen's birthday, Mummy?" I had no recollection, knew nothing about the 12th of July or that symbolism. She just believed that was. And I think, as I said, I think that is really where people are now.
Yeah, and I think that's how it should be. And but without, I'll be candid that most of the what most people don't understand over here is exactly what you alluded to a few minutes ago, is that probably the people that are the most loyal to Queen and country are the loyalists in Northern Ireland, are the unionist community. And they really do buy into the union in a way that most English people and to an extent Scots and Welsh people with their own separate nationalist issues just don't do that anymore. And I'm proud to say I'm British. I'm proud of all of the four nations of the union, and I do believe that we're stronger together. And yes, okay, there's no question about it. The Barnett formula favours Scotland. The Welsh get a good settlement, the Northern Irish get a good settlement, and you're quite right, the public sector in Northern Ireland is a dominant employer. But despite all of the differences we have, I'm more interested in what actually unites us. And I do believe that as a union, we are much stronger than the component parts split into four. So nice to speak to someone who, shall we say, is of similar view. I don't like echo chambers, but it's nice to find someone else that sees the world that way as well. Liz, I'm ever so grateful to you for joining me. And for those that haven't obviously seen Liz before, because she's not been on before, I'm going to be looking to speak with Liz probably every 6 to 8 weeks, because this show is not just about England, it's about the whole of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And I very much look forward to having you back on as things evolve, because I've got a feeling that in the run-up to the 2024 general election in Westminster, and also to the Dáil elections, that things are going to get quite interesting in Northern Ireland. And I want to make sure that we have have you back on regularly for some more pearls of wisdom. So Liz, thank you ever so much for coming on today. I'm most grateful to you for joining me, and have a great rest of the day.
Yes, you too.
All the best. Next, I'm delighted to introduce Gill Sewell. Gill has lived in Scotland since 1988, and it's fair to say, has seen the evolution of Scotland through Labour Party control through to SNP control for the last 15 years. Gill, thank you very much for coming on. It's lovely to meet you.
Morning. Yeah.
Gill, you very kindly volunteered to come on the show. Would you be kind enough just to give me a flavour of what you've seen over the last sort of 34, 35 years in Scotland, how things have changed, particularly around since devolution, things like the education system, the health system, the things that actually the devolved government has control over?
Well, everything's more or less gone downhill. SNP are currently ruining Scotland. It was a great place when I first moved up. Now we've got people in the street who are really rude and abusive. Basically, you get trolled if you disagree with Nicola Sturgeon on anything. Basically, if you don't vote SNP, you must be a rabid Tory. I mean, it doesn't matter what house you might vote for, but you're always called either a Nazi. They don't seem to realise their own history of their own party, or you're called really rude names. You get used to it. I mean, every day you get trolled for putting out a fact. I mean, they don't seem to like facts or figures.
So free speech then is not de rigueur in Scotland anymore, and Tory is probably a bigger slur now than Nazi, is it? Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, I mean, they really are revolting to anyone who doesn't agree with their ideas on being independent. They still think Westminster will pay for everything. They're not actually prepared to actually say what SNP have actually achieved in 14 years, which is more or less baby boxes no one wants and the charity shops can't take anymore. And tampons in the boys. That's their two policies they've actually managed And of course, the tampons problem was actually put up by Labour, not SNP, but they're counting it as a win.
Well, that's interesting, and tampons for boys. I think that's probably we're heading into identity politics territory there, and I'm not too sure that boys need tampons, but maybe I'm wrong. I mean, we live in a world now where women can have a penis, so maybe boys can have periods, Jill.
Yeah, well, it would be useful in first aid, I suppose, if anyone's got a new nosebleed. But I mean, honestly, their flagship policy, which was Labour's, and they've claimed credit for, was free sanitary for children. They made it for all children, not just girls.
No.
Which, another waste of money kind of thing. Like the phones in prisons for all of them, all the prisoners during COVID, where they all phoned up the fire brigade, pizzas, etc., etc. So basically, they love splash and cash around, but nothing on anything that actually makes Scotland better. I mean, we've got Pretendy Bank, 2 billion set up. That was our money. Then we've got 26, I think it is currently, Pretendy embassies. That's not helping Scotland in any way.
Pretendy embassies, I like that.
And we've also got Gaelic everywhere, so all the police cars and everything got Gaelic on. 1% of the population speak it. We've got 6% of the population speak Polish. It would have been more sensible to make signs all in Polish, but still, no, they've got to pretend Gaelic is the Scottish official language.
Yeah.
And it's not. Oh, we've got a new language, Scots. And that was on the census form.
A new language? Is this
an
SNP language?
They talk Scots, where you talk gobbledygook. I always thought that was where all the kids actually mention the F word every third word, but
Jill, what's your view on the health service in Scotland? I mean, this is one of the areas where, devolution was meant to give more power, more control, more local democracy. How's that working out?
Well, they can't employ enough nurses, but I must admit England got the same problem. But I mean, up in the Highlands, they've got so many vacancies; it's unbelievable. So of course, anywhere out of the city centre, try get dentist, no chance. Not on national health anyway. And I mean, that was one of the bribes last year: free dentistry for everyone. The problem is that was then retracted, and it's now for 22 and under. But you can't get an NHS dentist, so another freebie that didn't work. One of their wonderful bribes. I mean, they're all gimmicks, but I mean, we've got USAC running NHS Scotland now. Well, before him was Freeman. I mean,
Hamza Yousaf, aren't you?
Yeah, and I mean, of course, all the drugs beds and the alcohol dependency beds were taken away by Nicola Sturgeon, and all her successive health secretaries have actually removed even more. So we've got one place to treat all alcohol patients now. I mean, we've got a really high problem with alcohol deaths, but no, we're cut down even more beds. Drug problems, oh, well, that's the same. They cut all the beds down to something like about 12 or 14.
Well, considering that there's
18 now.
Am I right in saying it's something like 4 people a day? It's 1,300 people a year now are dying from drug-related deaths.
Yeah, and
in Scotland, it's got the highest rate in Europe.
From alcohol.
Alcohol as well.
So you've got alcohol, but she put the price up for everyone up here. But of course, that's just made them go on to drugs, because now drugs are cheaper than alcohol. Well, so I mean, it's not actually solved the alcohol problem. It's just, and you just think, and of course, they're still getting alcohol. You still quite often, see everyone drunk and
market forces.
They're still finding the money from somewhere.
Yeah, it's quite remarkable, that, isn't it? What about these ferries? What's this about these 2 enormous ferries for the islands that seem to me as though they're £500 million down the toilet? Have I got that right, or is that just the?
Oh, it's heading towards 500 million. I think it's about 420 million so far.
Right.
I mean, there's no chance they're ever going to sell at this rate. I mean, engines are now, I mean, by the time they actually get on the water, they're going to probably sink. I mean, she done a lovely opening ceremony for it all.
Yeah.
They painted windows on it because they didn't have windows in at the time. They're still there.
They painted windows on it.
You know, they're still sitting in there being built. She supposedly saved 400 jobs.
Right.
We say supposedly because no one can verify the number. But you just think it's just money down the tubes again. And then we got the Gooper deal that she's going to probably end up costing us somewhere along the lines of $1 billion.
Talk to me about that one.
Well, I mean, currently the serious fraud squad in France and London are both looking at this case at the moment. So expect that to hit the sidelines soon. But I mean, basically, she threw money at him, let him buy anything and everything he wanted. And basically, he's now being done for all sorts of tax evasion, etc., etc., etc. A nice little, you know, small holding went to him, you know, a nice country estate. That was probably part of the sweetener. But, you know, again, we can't find out because we don't have an open and transparent so-called government. They keep everything actually secret.
No wonder she's so supportive of Black Lives Matter. I
mean, honestly, we wonder how much of our money went to them as well. She loves throwing money abroad. I mean, even though it's not devolved, I mean, she still will insist on giving foreign aid everywhere, even though Westminster do it themselves and it's not a devolved matter. Of course, you know, trade is not devolved either. And I mean, if it's not devolved, she'll put a little grubby little hands onto it. We've got a railway system that 8 weeks into being actually owned nationally is now up the skids, and they've had to take away 33% of the service. You know, if you want to come home from Edinburgh, you've got to actually come home at about 8 o'clock. No trains after 8:30. Wow. That's going to really help the nightlife, isn't it? Going out anywhere when you can't get a train home.
Well, I think there's an assumption there that the SNP give any sort of concern or care for the economy. They don't. They clearly don't care about things like, well, I don't know, national debt, fractional or marginal rates of taxation, because it's other people's money, isn't it? I mean, tell me a little bit more, because you're much closer to it than I am, about this missing £600,000 and Peter Morrell. What's that all about?
Well, they had an indie fund which they raised from all their dear darling supporters, their cult members, and it was supposed to be spent just on indie too, but they spent it all on office furniture, new chairs and new tables, and it wasn't spent for what it was raised for. Apparently, he went to court, I think it was in April or was March, April time, but it's been referred further down the line after Mayor's election, just like Margaret Covid Ferrier's case has been referred to after the May's election. And Natalie McGarrity's actually, you know, just been found guilty of embezzling charity money. I mean, her case was put back after May's election.
Only 25,000 though, Gill. I mean, in the scheme of things, that's the sort of money that Nicola carries in her back pocket, I guess.
That's probably what she spends on her new shoes and her suits, but we're not allowed to see her expenses, of course, because that's another thing that's not in a national interest.
No, well, clearly not. And I'm sure the Procurator Fiscal would agree with Nicola on that. Talk to me, if you would. I mean, Nicola's, or should we call her true title, the nation's first Mammy, of course, because that's how she likes to be. That's how she likes to be referred to when she's not doing media appearances, selfies, and various other things that promote the Nicola Sturgeon show. Talk to me about her trip to the US, which clearly appears to be going down. I think I referred to it offline as a bucket of sick, and you didn't disagree with that, did you?
No, I mean, it has not gone down well. I mean, we've just got everything actually come out last week about the ferry deal being signed off, and the document being produced was an email which was supposed to be an official document. And of course, we're not allowed to see the real document with her signature on.
No.
And of course, anything that's released is retracted quite heavily. So basically, that happens and she's out the country. How convenient. Very, very suspicious that the timing of it was really well on her part, wasn't it?
Well, it would seem to me that redaction central is the SNP, particularly when it involved Alex Salmond, of course, because anything to do with any sort of formal investigation. It seems to me that the Scottish media must be on the payroll, because I don't ever see any significant criticism of the SNP or the leadership of the SNP in any of the Scottish press, with the possible exception of the Scottish Daily Mail. But unless I'm missing something, it's almost as though there's a shadow media going on up there, and the shadow is being cast by the SNP. Have I got that wrong? I mean, tell me.
If they report anything, it's usually page 8, 9, 10, further in, and it's a little article. And of course, they get phoned up by one of their special advisors on the payroll of us, the taxpayers. That will tell the editor off for actually saying anything negative about her. I think the fight back is starting to happen.
Okay.
But of course, probably the COVID money's probably run out now. I mean, the money that's disappeared from the COVID fund. But it's one of those things that they get trolled so much. If you look on any of their comments on any of their articles against SNP or reporting the truth, you'll find that they're trolled something really bad if they report anything negative about them.
Yes.
Like the truth.
Well, indeed.
They probably actually taken it that they can't be bothered with all the trolls that they get.
So I mean, that's a very serious situation. If free speech is being suppressed and open journalism is being suppressed because of the fear of a pile-on by so-called activists, then we don't have freedom of the press. Is that what we're saying here?
More or less up here. I mean, we've got BBC Scotland run by SNP. It's more or less SNP's own project. We've got STV. They get so much ad money from the Scottish government that, again, it's more or less run by SNP. So basically, we are limited on what we can get reported up here. And if they do put a story on about them, it is usually slipped in further in the page. You have to really read the whole newspaper because it's slipped in further in, hoping that the trolls won't catch it and give them any stick for it. I do think reporters are starting to wake up. They're not going to get all this money forever from the coffers, and they're going to have to actually start doing their job. But it's worrying, to say the least. Although saying that, there are a lot of ex-SNP supporters who are jumping ship because they no longer support her.
And where are they jumping to, Alba?
Mainly Alba, I think, but at least Alex Salmond did have an idea about businesses and how to run them. I mean, SNP, I haven't actually got any clue anything other than scouting indie this, indie that. They don't concentrate on their very well-paid jobs. They're too busy planning indie all the time.
Well, when you're a single-issue party, if you get your referendum and you get the victory that you want, that puts you out of business, or does it, Gill?
Well, up here, I would imagine that because in schools they're taught so much about how wonderful Nicola is. They basically got their new cult members coming through as we speak. I mean, they're taught from the first day they go into school how to get onto the SNP website and join up as a £2 member. I mean, basically, this is how early they start up here on how wonderful dear darling Nicola is, I mean, even though she's never actually achieved anything or not failed at anything.
Now, neither you nor I were born in the 1930s, but that has a slightly sinister edge to it, doesn't it? I can see the parallels there.
Yes, I mean, I think that must be her reading matter every night. Let's take it out of Mein Kampf and actually run with it, because they really have started in the schools, the colleges, the universities, very early on. I mean, they go over parks and give balloons to the children. Nice SNP ones, you know, put it in their mind before they can even speak. This is the problem. And no one said anything's wrong. It's only until lockdown that parents suddenly realised what their children were being taught.
I mean, Jill, when you first moved to Scotland in the late 80s, Scotland was flying high, way above England in terms of education achievement in these sort of global league tables, whereas now they've effectively been removed from the league tables because the results are so bad. Now, is this purely due to the politicisation of the education system, or is there something more fundamental here? Is it a lack of funding, or is it that they just spaff the money?
I don't think they care. They're just too busy trying to indoctrinate children. I mean, SNP should be considered a cult rather than a political party.
Wow.
I mean, they so blatantly believe everything she says. I mean, they really think that their pensions are still going to be paid by Westminster, even though they've been told it won't be. They believe that we'll still be allowed to use the pound, even though we've been told we won't be allowed to. Oh, I mean, our MPs actually reckon we'll be able to use plastic. I mean, basically, they seem to think that they'll still be able to pay with their Visa card, even though they haven't got the currency plans to actually back that up at all. It's slightly worrying that these people are supposed to be in charge of us.
What I find,
and they keep saying they talk for Scotland. They don't talk for Scotland. They're a minority up here. It's just Labour, Liberal and Conservatives will not actually start working together. Although saying that, this week, 4 or 5 councils have actually aligned that they will work together to keep SNP out.
So you've got the opposite of what is coming in England, where you can already see the beginnings of a Keep the Tories Out coalition if there is a minority government at the next election. In Scotland, you're saying that you've got the beginnings, just the first rumblings of an anti-SNP coalition.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've been asking them to do that before last year's election. They could have got her out then if they'd all decided that we'll stand here, you'll stand there. But no, they wouldn't do it because they were, you know, too busy on the gravy train themselves to worry about it. Our opposition are woeful. I mean, they stand in Hollywood, our name for Hollywood, and they ask her a question. All of her baying sheep behind her will bay along with her. She won't answer any actual question that makes her look bad, which is 95% of the questions she gets asked. She'll waffle away for 10 minutes on something completely different. And the presiding officer, who is a Green, so in other words, a cabbage SNP, won't actually pull her up for the fact she won't answer a question. And of course, they have to sit down when they've asked a question. They're not allowed to ask it again, you know, because it wasn't answered in the first place. But no, the whole thing's set up that Nicola can grandstand, give all these lovely big headlines, which we know won't actually happen, like the free laptops for everyone, the free bikes for everyone, all thrown down the back of the sofa after the headline was given out.
Yeah, of course.
So basically, you get to a stage where you can't believe a word they say.
So when it comes to the sort of principal opposition parties in Scotland, which, I mean, theoretically, it's Anna Sarwar for Labour and Douglas Ross for the Tories. I mean, are they any kind of opposition, really? I looked, obviously, following the local election results, where, you know, the SNP gained another 20-odd councillors, the Tories lost councillors and were overtaken by Labour. But, I mean, do either of those two characters have any backbone whatsoever to take...
Well, they ask the question. They do ask the questions.
Right.
It's just it never gets answered because she knows the answer is actually disastrous for her, and she won't admit she can't do anything. According to her, she's a control. Well, according to her own sister, she's a control freak. So her little grubby hands are over everything. But of course, nothing's ever her fault, even though it was her fault. It's Westminster's fault, even though it's devolved. It's Westminster's fault, even though it's happened under her watch. It's Westminster's fault, even though, you know, she signed it off, but we can't see the document because she's lost it. been
Yeah,
shredded in one of her mysterious shredders.
and she does have a habit of, or unfortunate things happen to her. Let's put it that way. We've got to be, let's be polite about her here because, well, actually, for no reason whatsoever, common decency, I suppose. But Gill, that's fascinating. And if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to come back on from time to time, because I think it's really important that people in the other parts of the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland get a real feel for what is going on. I mean, it's very easy to cover England and focus on Westminster and all of that bubble. Most of it is pretty turgid stuff. But Scotland is effectively being run as a fiefdom, a private fiefdom, by the Sturgeon Morel family. And not enough light is being shone on this. And I believe that light is the best form of disinfectant. It's a cliche, but it's true. So if you're amenable, I'm going to ask you to come back on from time to time, and we'll continue to discuss the evolution in Scotland. Thank you ever so much for coming on today. And well, everybody that's watching, that was Gill Sewell, 34 years in Scotland of English extraction. So she's seen things on both sides of the fence. My next guest is Richard Lucas, who is the leader of the Scottish Family Party. Richard, good morning, and thank you very much for joining me.
Good morning. Pleasure to be here.
Richard, you're well aware of the situation in Scotland with the Scottish National Party and the, shall we say, decline in educational performance over the last 15 years. Do you want to just sketch as an outline exactly where the decline began and what you think the causality might be?
Yeah, whenever I'm asked that, I always say, you know, where do I start? Where do I start? Because every aspect of education in Scotland has been mismanaged, and it's just in a downward spiral.
Wow.
I mean, the academic side, let's start at the heart of education. I mean, a new curriculum was introduced so just over 20 years ago, so the Curriculum for Excellence, and it's really vague and woolly, so-called pupil-centered. So instead of, you know, these are the things you need to learn, this is what you need to be able to do by this stage, it's things like you have enjoyed, you are able to talk about, you have explored, you've been part of a discussion. I mean, these sort of things. I mean, it really is dreadful. So that's been a large part of the problem. Then the public exams have been watered down to the standard of the curriculum as well. So now there's an exam system that pupils take when they're sort of 15 years old, called National Fours. It's entirely assessed within the school, and it's just wide open to corruption. The teachers invigilate and mark the tests, and the pupils can retake them as often as they want to. So there's a few years ago, there was a whistleblower, a maths teacher said, look, this is just pure corruption. He said, I'm not doing it. I'm expected just to basically cheat. So he went to his head teacher and said, look, I'm not doing this. It's got no integrity at all. I'm not just cheating these pupils through this by holding their hand and, you know, keeping doing it till they pass. So the head teacher said, okay, that's fine. We'll just get someone else to do it then. That's the situation.
That is, I mean, that's breathtaking stuff. So it's the sporting equivalent of lose your first 37 games of the season, but hey, if you win that 38th, you get the gold medal. Yeah.
So have a situation where you've got pupils who haven't turned up to a lesson for the entire school year, for whatever reason. They just haven't bothered turning up. Then it's the job of the teacher to go and physically find them and say, please come with me, come and sit in the room for an hour and we'll get these tests done. And if you get it wrong the first time, I'll give you a bit more teaching, then you can take it again. And we'll keep doing that until you've passed. So basically everyone's going to pass, because their big mission in Scottish education is to close the attainment gap, which is they want schools in wealthier areas and schools in poorer areas to get exactly the same results, which is never going to happen. It's never going to happen. They assume that academic ability is equally distributed between income groups, which is just fantasy. It's just not true.
It sounds more like
that's the heart of their education policy.
I mean, you know, we can make a discussion, and happy to have a discussion around social mobility and educational excellence, but it doesn't necessarily correlate that because someone comes from a wealthy background, they happen to have above average intelligence, and equally, if someone comes from a so-called deprived background, that they're not capable of good educational attainment.
Yeah, absolutely. In general, though, academic ability on average is going to be stronger in wealthier areas It's going to be a bit weaker, unless that's the general picture. But the SNP has decided that they refuse to accept reality. So they think if they could just get schooling right, then there'd be the same results. So the way they do it is they just throw money at schools in poorer areas with poorer performance. So they just give them, grant after grant. With one school, I'm not exaggerating, this is the absolute truth. One school spent their special attainment funding on buying their pupils teddy bears. They bought their pupils teddy bears, and that was how they thought they were going to improve their academic attainment. I mean, you couldn't make it up. It's just bizarre.
I'm just trying to correlate in my head, and look, forgive me, I'm a simple soul. Special attainment funding with a teddy bear. That's insanity. I'm sorry, I can't compute. Computer says no.
And that was reported in the General Teaching Council for Scotland's professional journal. There's an article about this example of good practice where pupils had been bought teddy bears to improve their attainment.
It's fascinating because when I was researching for the show, and I don't make a habit of doing this because it's not good for your eyes, but I actually read a New Statesman piece on the SNP and their educational mismanagement of Scotland. And even the New Statesman, which you would think would be, one of those publications that would, shall we say, be a sort of almost a grandstander for the SNP. No. They had it absolutely where you have it, that this is a complete mess. And I want to understand here that, there's been a lot of sort of talk around 4-year-old kids being told, that they may not be a boy or a girl. They may be a boy today and a girl tomorrow, and that they may need, somebody, not their parents, obviously, to guide them on that journey. But right through, I think I'm right in saying that right through to post-18 education, if you look at where Scotland is now and where it was, say, at the turn of the millennium, on every metric, it is failing education.
But they've got a solution to that problem. And the solution is to pull out of all the international comparisons and to also not even have any sort of consistent assessment within Scotland. So there's an academic, an educational academic in Scotland who says it's a data desert. They deliberately avoid gathering objective data. And then the problem's solved, isn't it? No one can say your standards are falling if no one's measuring them.
That sounds rather sort of Chairman She-like, doesn't it, really?
Yeah.
Unless I'm missing something here. So not only do we not have to worry anymore about how many times we sit the exam, we don't even have to worry what the results of that exam are, because we're not going to collect them, we're not going to publish them, and therefore we can't be peer group assessed.
No, I mean, what happened, so this closing the attainment gap is a priority. During the lockdowns, when schools were closed, the pupils didn't sit exams. So the teachers basically made up the grades by various criteria using their coursework. When the teachers made up the grades, there was massive grade inflation, especially in schools in poorer areas. I mean, completely ludicrous, like 2 grades higher than they'd been historically. So the same happened in England. So the Scottish Qualifications Authority said, okay, this is a bit ridiculous. We're just going to rein it in a little bit. We're just going to rein in some of this grade inflation, particularly in school, where it's out of sync with schools' previous performance. We're just going to moderate it a little bit. Then you get kids holding up placards saying this is, postcode discrimination or whatever. So the government capitulated and they just got whatever grades the teachers gave them. But now people in Scotland are saying, this is obviously the solution to closing the attainment gap. If instead of having objective criteria and standardized tests, if we just have the teachers making the grades up, then that's the way we're going to get this genuine measure of attainment that's fair across the income groups. And that's the direction it's heading in. So the Scottish Qualifications Authority, the exam board, basically, has been abolished for the crime of trying to be statistically rigorous and fair. So they're being abolished. Then something new is going to be created. It's going to be pushed more and more in the anti-meritocratic direction. A lot of this is driven by the Green Party. Everything in Scotland really is driven by the Green Party. They lead the way and the other parties follow on behind them. But they would like to see exams gone completely, because they're elitist. And they want a much more egalitarian, everyone gets the same result.
Well, it seems to me from what you're saying that the principle of, look, if it's about raising education standards to an acceptable or a better still, a supreme level for all, that's something I think we could all sign on to. But what you seem to be describing is an egalitarian level that effectively, no, don't have too much aspiration. Let's all operate at this nice low level here where we can all control the population. And I tell you what, if you click that link, you can become a member of the SNP.
It's
you
social
can vote
engineering.
for us. Sorry?
It's social engineering. But the fact is, with education, I think that's quite interesting, that the higher a quality of education you provide, the bigger the gap between the most able and the least able students.
Yeah.
If you imagine you provide virtually no education, just a bit of basic numeracy and literacy, then pretty well everyone's going to reach the same standard. But the better your education system becomes, the more spread out the outcomes will be for different pupils, because the ones with more potential will be able to show that. So in Scotland, they're determined to close that gap. So the way you close that gap is having a lower and lower quality education system, which is what they're doing. Which is what they're heading towards.
So instead of having a class war, we just basically dismantle the excellent education system we had and downgrade it to the equivalent of an Austin Allegro education system.
Yeah, but at least it's the same for everyone. That's what counts.
Well, that's it was the same for everybody back in the 1930s in Hitler's Germany, wasn't it? But probably an unfair comparison to draw. I'm sure the nation's first Mammy would not like the comparison. But nevertheless, what speak can't speak.
Just say about the chief Mammy.
The nation's first Mammy, the nation's chief Mammy.
Yeah, I mean, Nicola Sturgeon called herself the chief Mammy. She was actually talking to a group of children who'd been in like local authority care. And there's a policy in Scotland called corporate parenthood, which means that lots of public servants have to see themselves in the role of parents to basically to orphans or children who've been in care, which is sort of okay. And Nicola Sturgeon used the word chief Mammy in that context. And the first person who heard that is my claim to fame. I actually found that watching this obscure video, and I thought, what? You're calling yourself the chief Mammy? So I passed it on to newspapers, etc., and it's caught on. And she's called that quite regular now, but you heard it here first. I found that in some obscure video or online on YouTube.
And why do you think that the media in Scotland, there appears to be an absolute whiteout on any significant criticism, with perhaps the exception of someone like Stephen Daisley at the Daily Mail? There seems to be no mainstream media in Scotland that are willing to say, this is wrong. The SNP are failing Scotland. Why do you think that is?
Well, I don't know. The Daily Mail, the Express, the Telegraph. I mean, there are media outlets that do that, but the television is really tame, and the Scottish homegrown press as well is pretty tame as well. But even in these ones that are critical, it's within a very narrow range of views. You can criticize for example, I talked about the attainment gap. The fact that the whole philosophy of it is just wrong. And if you make that the center of your educational policy, you're going to go off the rails. But within the Scottish Parliament, every party, including the Conservatives, the Conservatives will say, yes, that's our central goal as well. Just we think we'd be better at it than you. You're not doing very well at it. There's no one saying, no, that the whole pretext, this whole thing, the whole foundation of your thinking is wrong. There's no one who will say that. There's no one who, and they won't publish that either, usually, in the some mainstream press, let alone on television. So debate gets squashed up into this narrow range that it proceeds as though you accept the assumptions of the SNP rather than step outside them and like criticize the whole ideology.
So a complete lack of critical thinking. I mean, I'm looking at Anna Sewell. Okay, Labour made some gains in the local elections, but largely, let's be honest, at the expense of the Tories. Tories went backwards. But whether it's Anna Sewell or Douglas Ross, it seems to me as though let's take something like First Minister's questions. It all seems to be stage managed. It never seems to me as though Sturgeon is put under any appreciable pressure. And when she is, she deflects. So there doesn't seem to be any accountability at Holyrood.
It's all management issues. It's all things to do with numbers. This project hasn't been managed well, rather than the whole idea of what you're doing. Your fundamental principles of what you're doing are wrong. And that's why you're making a mess of it. It's all just, it's been mismanaged. If you accuse someone like Nicola Sturgeon of mismanaging something, of course she's always going to have answers to that. Oh, there are special things, there were unforeseen circumstances, or you don't realize how difficult it was, and we're doing the best we're going to sit. So that doesn't really challenge her. If you're on her side and you're disposed to accept her explanations, then they sound perfectly plausible. But like I said, what we need is politicians are going to say, look, your whole understanding, your whole philosophy of political philosophy, your whole ideology is wrong. And that's what we need to get to. But they don't get, it's all managerial criticism. You're not quite managing it right. If we were in charge, we'd have been able to manage that a little bit better.
And what part of this, this junket to the US, how is that benefiting Scotland? How is that benefiting the education system? Because, I mean, apart from criticising the prospect of another Trump presidency, I can't see anything significant that has been achieved.
No, I mean, the mission of the SNP is independence. Look at the fundamental aims of the party. Number one is independence. Number two is trying to make things better in Scotland. So number one is independence. So Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP, they think anything they can do that's acting as though Scotland was already an independent country is a good thing, and that's what it should do. Or anything you can do that will make Scotland different from the rest of the United Kingdom in some way, then that's something that's worth pursuing. So Nicola Sturgeon going on these sort of foreign missions, that's what you do if you're the head of an independent nation. So that's what they do. That's what the SNP will do. They want to play the part before it's the reality.
I'm going to put this to you. As a single issue party, do you actually believe that they really want independence?
Now, lots of people say that. I believe that they do in theory. I believe in practice, I think the current SNP is terrified of the prospect of suddenly winning a referendum and finding they've got the reins in their hands and they've got the responsibility for the nation's finances and future. I really do think that terrifies them because they know the numbers don't add up and they fear being put in that situation. Because at the moment, it's the ideal situation. You can blame, you can run the country, anything that goes wrong, you can blame it on Westminster. You can whip up the independent support, the nationalist support. But that's a pretty comfortable position to be in. But if they actually get independence, then suddenly there's a lot more pressure on. The stakes are raised. So I think a lot of people in the SNP, they like it in theory, but they don't quite like the idea of them holding the reins in a newly independent Scotland.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I ask is obviously living post-Brexit vote world, almost 6 years on, and seeing politicians and civil servants extremely reluctant to actually accept the fact that we have left the European Union and we can now make decisions. It just dawned on me that, I think Nicola Sturgeon, I'm going to give her some credit for one thing, and that is how she presents brand Sturgeon is largely pretty good. I think she manages her personal brand quite well. But I think when it actually comes down to the nuts and bolts of this, and I can see the potential if there is a minority government in 2024 at Westminster, which I think there's a distinct possibility of now, unless the Tories turn their fortunes around, that the SNP will extract a very, very high price from Keir Starmer, assuming he's still in post, or whoever it turns out that the Keep the Tories Out coalition elect as Prime Minister. For example, taking a huge slice of the debt that Scotland has run up and dumping it back on the British balance sheet so they can go and join the European Union and converge with the euro, but all of that kind of stuff. But when it actually comes to the nuts and bolts of it, I don't believe that they actually want independence. Deep down, I think, yes, the idea is great, but the reality is if they won, I just don't believe that the support would be there in Scotland for the SNP. Now, it may be that they go on and they change the name of the party and they carry on regardless, but anecdotally, speaking to others and speaking to others on the record, it seems to me that the SNP vote now has topped out. It kind of is what it is in terms of people that vote for the party. And then separately looking at the issue of a referendum, it strikes me that probably January of 2021 was when it seemed to be peaking, i.e. there was a solid level of support of around 54% of the population that wanted independence when polled, when surveyed. Now, whether or not they were telling the truth or not is another thing, but the polls were pretty consistent. But actually, looking at it now, it seems to me that it's come much more back towards 50-50, maybe even 49-51. And generally speaking, when it all comes down to it, that people would be more likely to stay in the United Kingdom than leave. Is that broadly how you would see things?
Yeah, I think SNP support, that there's a significant portion of it that just see voting for the SNP as like an extension of supporting the Scottish football team.
Yes, I get that.
It appeals to nationalist sentiment, and that's it. They don't see anything beyond that. There's another portion that is maybe a bit more open to reason. What tends to happen though when there's a secession movement around the world is it tends to focus around a single political party, and then if independence happens, then that single political party tends to be in power for a good while afterwards as well, because they're seen as like synonymous with the nation. I mean, the SNP like to talk as though they are Scotland. So I think that the SNP being a major force in that regard is going to continue. In terms of the independence, independence movements tend to recede as well when there's an external threat. So I think the current world situation, again, might undermine Scottish independence. For all that they're going to say, oh, we'd be better at defending against Russia if we were independent, or we'd be better at supplying our food if we were independent, or whatever. And then basically people don't believe that. And people actually think the security of being part of something bigger makes a lot of sense. So I think in an increasingly dangerous, uncertain, threat-filled world, I think Scottish independence is likely to recede then again. I mean, apparently, between the Napoleonic Wars and the First World War, Scottish independence gained some ground during that stage. But as soon as the external threats came on the scene, the world wars, it was finished. It went right back, and then got going again through a long period of peace afterwards.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about your party in a second, but just briefly on the Greens. I mean, it strikes me now that, she was one seat short, the SNP were one seat short of a majority at Holyrood, which under the voting system, clearly Blair didn't do his maths well, because that should never really happen. But just in terms of the Greens, I mean, on issues as wide-ranging as nuclear weapons, NATO, education, how much do you think, because it seems from what you said earlier on, as though it's actually the Greens ideologically that are leading the policy agenda in Scotland?
Yeah, the Greens run the country. Basically, the SNP, Labour and the Lib Dems trot along behind. The Conservatives follow them, dragging their heels a little bit, but they still get to the same place in the end. And the thing of the Greens, they know what they think. They've got their arguments ready. And the SNP basically haven't got answers for the Greens' arguments, because the Greens are just more logical with the same presuppositions that the SNP holds. For example, I say the SNP has turned schools into Green Party indoctrination camps, basically. The SNP, they thought they were turning schools into SNP indoctrination camps, but they were so effective, they're actually turning generations into Green voters because they're a bit more extreme. So even a lot of what the SNP says, it actually leads people to support the Green Party.
Yeah.
So they're very influential. The other thing is as well, some people have learned that voting Green is a way of playing the system, the Scottish electoral system, because using your second vote, your list vote for the SNP, is pretty unfruitful. But if you vote for another independent supporting party, then that increases the chance of getting an SNP government, basically, or an independent supporting government.
Okay. And that's how you game the system. Now, it's all very well talking about other parties, but it's probably time we talked about yours. I appreciate you coming on, but just give me a flavour, if you would, for those that aren't aware of the Scottish Family Party, of what you stand for, what your core beliefs are, and how different Scotland would look. And I'm guessing it's rather different from what it does now under the Scottish Family Party. Yeah,
we're a relatively new party. We started just under 5 years ago. I was the founder with a few other people as well. We started from absolutely nothing. I've got a full-time job at the time, just working on the family party and the study in the evenings, etc. We've been growing since then. We've just had candidates in the council elections. We had 84 candidates around the country. I mean, our policies, we've got quite a range of policies, but our strapline is filling the void in Scottish politics. So we're not particularly wanting to wade into every debate going, because there's already plenty of MSPs talking about lots of the other issues. So, for example, on independence, we're neutral. We don't think there should be another referendum within the course of this Parliament. Well, our policies, we don't think there should be a referendum until there's a clear majority for a substantial number of years.
Okay.
If that's the situation, then have a referendum. But if there were a referendum campaign, we wouldn't campaign one way or another. Now, in Scotland, that's revolutionary. I mean, there's no other party, as far as I'm aware, that doesn't take one side. Normally in Scotland, that's the first question people think if you're deciding which party you're going to support. It's unionist or nationalist. But our point is that this constitutional debate is just like sucking the life out of every other policy area.
Well, it's a useful way of deflecting, isn't it?
Yeah. Another thing I'd say to unions as well, is the union really going to be saved by keeping talking about it, by keeping the Constitution at the centre of political discussion? I would suggest not. Even for nationalists, are you really going to persuade people by keeping talking about the Constitution, or do you need to offer a more positive vision? So we stay out of, to some extent, of some of the mainstream issues, but we're I mean, pro-family. The Scottish government's got an incredible record for interfering in family life, so we'd want to stop that. But also we would look at policies to promote stable family life and to support families, to enable people to have as many children as they want to help them financially through that. We promote marriage as a means of promoting family stability, which just seems such an obvious policy because the impact of it would be colossal.
Well, given the birth rate in Scotland is 1.3 per birth woman, and that's 2.1 is population replacement, you've got quite some way to go to actually maintain a viable Scotland. Oh yeah,
it's a massive problem. But in terms of, family breakdown as well, it leads to so many other problems that the government just throws money at. So they'll sit there in the Parliament saying, oh, youth mental health, there's a crisis, we need to spend even more money. But where's a lot of it come from? It comes from family breakdown. So how about looking at policies that will reduce family breakdown? But the existing parties, they just won't go there.
The Conservative Party in Scotland, it seems to me, and look, they had a degree of electoral success, I guess, under Ruth Davidson, but does seem to have joined the identitarian bandwagon. Whereas it seems to me from what you're saying that the void you're filling, if I'm reading the runes correctly, is that you're a socially conservative small c party that values the family and puts the family at the centre of policy, which to me, as an old school small c conservative, makes eminent sense. I mean, I can no longer identify with the Conservative and Unionist Party as being either conservative or unionist, frankly. Let's just speak to our friends in Northern Ireland, and they'll certainly confirm the latter point. On the former point, they are now a Blairite party that has been hijacked and has no interest in returning to the centre-right, as far as I can see. No. But I mean, I would think, knowing just from a finger in the air assessment, there is still a good rump of people in Scotland that would support your policy platform.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in terms of identity politics, I mean, the Scottish government is just berserk with identity politics. I mean, it's a different level than what you see in England. I mean, it really is terrible. And there are lots of people.
I'm in London, so it might be similar here, I can promise you. But I know what you mean. If you look at the rest of England, I would agree with you.
Yeah. And that's something a lot of people are objecting to. It comes through in indoctrination in schools as well. Freedom of speech, it's a big issue. That's one of our policies, and we're a pro-life party. And that's a section of the electorate. It's a significant part of the electorate that's completely unrepresented. And I think worldwide, that issue is coming onto the political agenda. It has done in America, obviously, big time.
Well, with Roe v. Wade being overturned, I mean, I may well get you back on, actually, if you're amenable. If that ruling does become, which I suspect it will do when the court rises, when that does become de facto rather than, or de jure rather than de facto, then, I mean, that is going to cause clearly a fissure in the United States leading up to the midterms. But yeah, if you're amenable, I would love to get you back on and speak about that, because it seems to me from what you're talking about, and we've not discussed your thoughts on spending and fiscal policy and wider things, but I understand that the concentration initially is essentially putting the family at the core of everything that you do and every act that you make as a potential government. And that, to me, that I'm guessing that's going to chime a bell, not just with, sort of, if you want to go along religious lines, old school Calvinism, but that surely appeals outside of the Glasgow bubble, for want of a better term, or the Holyrood bubble, I suppose, if you think of the Parliament, but outside of those who are very, very tight with identity politics, I would think that has a broad-based appeal.
Yeah, I think it's a very attractive set of policies. Part of the challenge is it's so unfamiliar to people.
Yes.
If, for example, in the election campaign last year, I produced something saying, right, these are some of the benefits that marriage brings. And I said, higher educational attainment. Children from married families do better at school. And someone said, so are you saying kids should get married before they take their exams? So these ideas are completely alien to people, because you can watch the mainstream media for a month of Sundays and you will never hear any reference to them.
Yes.
So it's a challenge to help people to understand the rationale for these policies. I think people are very open to them. So our disadvantage is people are very unfamiliar with the ideas, but our advantage is that they're interesting. It's something new, instead of just the same old that's really getting stale.
Yeah, and look, in my own small way, I'm more than happy to obviously give you the platform today and to give you a platform in the future. The whole premise of the show is to look at the world through the prism of small c conservatism, which seems to be exactly what you're espousing, and exactly what is missing from the modern day Conservative Party. And in the rest of the United Kingdom, and indeed some of these parties stand in Scotland as well, between Reclaim and Reform and Heritage and the SDP, who would be socially conservative, obviously fiscally a little bit more liberal. We've got a real smattering of people, and there needs to be a sort of coalescing around this policy platform that I think is extremely attractive, and for the people that are aspirational, even more so. And I think that plenty of people have this, but I think in Scotland, it appears to me that, after 15 years of the SNP and their, for want of a better term, brainwashing of the populace, I mean, how are they still winning more councillors now after 15 years in power? I mean, is there any suggestion here, Richard, of electoral gerrymandering?
I would, no, I wouldn't say. I'd need very hard evidence before suggesting that. I find that all I need to do is watch the BBC 6 o'clock news, and then it reminds me why people keep voting for the SNP.
Yeah,
because things are presented in such a tame. For example, during the height of the lockdowns, I don't watch it very often. I happened to watch one of them. There's, Nicola Sturgeon had announced some new stringent measures beyond what England was doing, but the BBC report was just right. Nicola Sturgeon said that here's an expert who agrees with her, and then they went into the streets interviewing people, and everyone they interviewed said, "Oh well, okay, if that's what we need, okay, well that's good. I suppose we'll have to do that." No diversity of thought at all. They should have had someone on coming on saying, no, that's unnecessary. Look what this country's done. That's wrong. But the BBC just handles her with kid gloves, and you realize why they can maintain that level of popularity.
Well, my recollection was that Nicola Sturgeon's stooge was Devi Sridhar, and Devi Sridhar seemed to become almost a media personality for SNP COVID policy, and she was on the television on a very regular basis, not just in Scotland but throughout the United Kingdom. And I think there was a period where Scotland was doing better at maybe, I don't know, infection control or the number of people that were dying. And of course, as soon as that changed, Debbie disappeared off the screen and left Nicola behind. But no, you're quite right. I mean, like you, I try for media plurality. I do look across the spectrum. There are certain publications that just ideologically I just can't read because they're one step down from the Beano, or watch for that matter. And unfortunately, the BBC has become one of those. I mean, I was watching a debate about Doctor Who, and the new Doctor and the trans assistant and everything else, and I just thought, push the button on that. Peter Purves was on, who was in the original Doctor Who back in 1965, and he's sort of shaking his head. I can't believe Peter Purves is 83, but anyway, I've digressed. But no, the BBC for me, certainly in terms of the news platform, is one to one to avoid, along with it's Channel 4 as well, which is the mouthpiece of the Labour Party. It's been an absolute joy to have you on. And as I say, if assuming Roe v. Wade does go through, I'd love to have you on again. To be honest, I'd love to have you on again from time to time anyway, because I think in the run up to the 2024 general election, this is not going to go away. And we need to shine a light on what is happening in Scotland, not just with the education system, and perhaps next time we can broaden the debate out slightly in terms of other policy platforms. But I think, you know, the way in which the SNP are literally getting away with highway robbery in plain sight of our children's education in Scotland really does need to be dug deep. Richard, thank you ever so much for joining me, and have
pleasure.
a lovely what's left of it. That was Richard Lucas, the leader of the Scottish Family Party. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. It's time for that begging bowl again. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe to the channel, share the video, and click like. It will make the algorithm folks very happy. On next week's show, I'll be interviewing Alexandra Marshall from the Australian Spectator on the Australian elections, where Labour have won power for the first time since 2013. Benjamin Lockname, Research Fellow at the Bow Group, will be joining me to discuss immigration against a backdrop of more vacancies in the economy than we have people registered unemployed. Matthew Evans, MBE, Leader of the Opposition on Newport City Council, will be sharing his views on the issues facing the Tories following the local election results. Finally, Graham Sargent will be telling the awful story of the horrific abuse at Beach Home Children's Home in Wandsworth that took place in the 1950s, 60s and 70s, and the survivors' fight for justice and compensation. Have a great week. Think freely. They haven't taxed it. Yet. All the best.